book lovers, it is G-Swizz here, and I'm here today to talk about some books that I gave a second chance. If you didn't know, this is a 7 on Sunday topic, and I am the host of 7 on Sunday. I will link the Goodreads page down in the description where you can check it out and you can participate in a topic in the future, or you can suggest a topic. And this week's 7 on Sunday is actually a follow-up from a topic we did a couple months ago where we talked about some books that we do want to give a second chance. However, some of us might have some books that we did give a second chance and that we would want to discuss. I have wanted to do this topic for a while, and so I decided why not slide it into this month and let me talk about it, I guess. I love giving books a second chance because sometimes you either read a book in the wrong headspace, or sometimes you attempt to read a book and then you DNF it and you realize that you're not in the mood to read it, but you definitely do want to get to it. One of those scenarios are going to correspond to each of the books that I'm going to be talking about on this list today and pretty much go through. So I guess without further ado, I'm going to get straight into some books that I gave a second chance and tell you whether I liked them better, I appreciated them better. The first one I bring up on this list is probably going to be a surprise to many people because it has been such a long time since I've read it and I keep on endorsing it on my channel, but I don't know if any of you guys know that I gave the Darker Shade of Magic series a second chance. This is probably my favorite series by Victoria Schwab. I mean, not necessarily my favorite books by Victoria Schwab, considering that The Invisible Life of Addie LaRue is in the mix now. However, this is my favorite series, but I didn't like A Darker Shade of Magic as much as the rest of the books. Honestly, it took me getting into A Gathering of Shadows for me to really be invested in this series, but I wasn't invested from book one. And I was debating whether to not continue on with the series, and I am so happy that I chose to continue on with the series because, oh my goodness, it did get better. I 100% do not regret continuing on with the series, and I'm so excited for the spin-offs that are gonna come eventually. Oh my goodness, it's taking a while, Victoria, but yeah, I understand there are a lot of writing projects for her in the mix right now. Honestly, I'm so grateful that I decided to soldier on with the series because I just fell in love with it from book two. I loved the characters from book two. I don't know, I just felt like there was a bit more of an emotional connection to those characters after going further into the series. It was so much better to see other parts of the world and see other POVs within the series than just stick to a limited POV in this book. I only remember this book following Kel the most, and I'm not gonna lie, Kel is probably my least favorite character. Like, I do like Kel, I do enjoy following him. However, I liked how much more I got out of the story when I followed the other characters. My thoughts might change once I go back into A Darker Shade of Magic 5 years later, but what I do know is that I'm so happy I continued on from this point, because if I didn't, I would have not been a huge Victoria Schwab fan, or like, I really don't actually know, because this series is essentially what got me into her writing. Vicious, that took me a while to get into as well. That is an honorable mention, and eventually I got into the series, but I have to say that when it comes to Victoria Schwab's series, her second books are usually the best, and they're usually a step up. And the next book I've got to mention that I actually gave a second chance that you guys probably don't know about is Furyborn by Claire Legrand. I love the Imperium trilogy. It is one of my favorite trilogies of all time, but honestly, I don't think I would have loved it as much as I do now if I didn't revisit Furyborn a few years after Furyborn first came out. And I was actually debating as to whether I should have continued on with this series or not, because as much as I do enjoy Furyborn, it's not necessarily the strongest first book in this trilogy. I believe that the second book is the strongest book in the trilogy. The second book is one of my favorite sequels of all time, and Kingsbane is like the largest book in the series. It's like 600 pages. I just could not stop reading it, and it was probably the book that I read the fastest in the series. I was absolutely obsessed with it, and I know that a lot of people don't necessarily like the conclusion, but I do. I appreciate the conclusion, even though it was very bittersweet, but I would not have experienced the awesomeness of Claire Legrand's writing within this trilogy if I didn't give Furyborn a second chance years after I read it for the first time. Pretty sure I read this a couple of years ago when it first came out and people were hyping it up, but honestly, the hype died down, and seriously, I feel so sad that it died down because this is a very well-written trilogy that deserves so much praise and so much hype. No, I do not condone the toxic relationship in this series. However, the story itself, the plot itself, is chef's kiss perfection. Now I have to bring up Serpent and Dove by Shelby Mahern. This was very interesting because I had to take out my personal bias when it came to this book series and giving it a second chance. Now, I'm not gonna lie, I was triggered by the religious abuse in the series at first. It rubbed me the wrong way, but I think I was also a bit bitter about the fact that the religious side of the story, they were deemed as the antagonizing side. But you know, sometimes there are, in real life, terrible people who will do terrible things in the name of religion. It kind of rubbed me the wrong way the first time I read it, but then I realized that when I was reading Serpent and Dove, I wanted to give it a second chance because that is actually kind of realistic. At the time, I was really struggling with my own faith, but a lot of the time, I felt like I was mostly struggling because I was struggling to have the same faith that a lot of other hateful people did. I eventually found my own faith after going through that, and I'm so appreciative that I found my individual faith rather than what a lot of bigoted people will say. I felt like this book actually helped me do that. I went into it a second time, and I appreciated it even more after going through that experience. The first time I actually read this book, I just really struggled with some aspects of it, and I think it was because it just triggered the state of trauma that I went through previously with some former church experiences. This book will do that to some because it is definitely in a religious setting. It eventually moves away from that as the series goes along, but the first book is definitely based in a religious church setting. But I kind of like that this book addresses that kind of group of people and the people who will truly love and accept people and will respect and treat others as you'd want yourself to be treated, essentially. And I'm so happy that I caught onto that. Not even just the second time, but also the first time. I just feel like the second read was very important for me because then I realized that this was one of my favorite book series of all time, and I truly got the message that Shelby Mahurin was trying to teach through the series. And the next book slash series I gave a second chance was the Scythe, or the Arc of the Scythe trilogy by Neal Shusterman. It is one of the most iconic young adult series out there, in my opinion. I love it because I feel like it brought young adult dystopian back for a brief moment, but everybody was here for it because the way that Neal Shusterman wrote the series, you could not deny that this is some good dystopian. However, I didn't gel with this book at first. It took me around a month or two to get through this first book. It was so hard to get back into reading because I felt like Scythe wasn't necessarily the right book for me, but I just kept on soldiering on, and I realized that the series was right for me once I finished Scythe. I actually don't necessarily remember much about the first book, and I know a lot of people say that the first book is like their favorite, or Thunderhead is their favorite. Thunderhead is definitely my favorite, and I like the continuation from Scythe onwards, but all I remember about Scythe was the plot twist at the end. The plot twist at the end, it kind of reminded me of a Hunger Games game changer, you know? That is how wild it was for me. I had to give this series a second chance because I thought to myself that I was only gonna read Scythe and then just finish there. I told myself that I was gonna soldier on with this book, and then that's it. At the end of this book, I couldn't have that mentality anymore. I had to race through the rest of the books, and that's what I did. I raced through the rest of the books. I loved the rest of the series so much, and honestly, I really have this book to thank for that. If I didn't read the end of this book, I don't know if I would have given the rest of the series a second chance. Like, honestly, this is why I don't DNF things. Now, this book that I'm just about to mention, I actually read on a vacation, and I completely forgot everything about it, and honestly, I was really distracted by my vacation, so I had to give it a second chance before the sequel came out, and I loved doing that. Unfortunately, I didn't love the sequel as much, but I'm really happy that I gave Where Dreams Descend a second chance. I really love the story, and this is a debut novel by Janella Angelis. I reckon that she wrote the story very well. The problem is, I feel like this book suffers from the duology problem, you know, where everything is like really rushed in the second book, because this series had potential to be a trilogy. It would work well as a trilogy. I reckon that this story is perfectly paced to set up a trilogy, but unfortunately, the second book just rushed everything, and yeah, we're not gonna see these characters anymore, and that makes me so sad. However, I really appreciated my second read of this because I could really take time with these characters and to get to know their abilities and just like what was going on. I felt like I could do that when I was just reading it at my own pace rather than just doing it like on a vacation and like trying to get some reading time in and then all of a sudden enjoy my vacation. Honestly, my vacation overshadowed my first reading experience, and yeah, you know, I do regret attempting to read this on vacation, but I don't regret my reread of it because if I didn't have my reread, then I wouldn't have appreciated the amazing writing and the effort Janella Angelis put into this novel. And the next book I'm going to mention on this list is actually a book that I did give a second chance on the way to and from a vacation, which is very fascinating, except Camilo wasn't there. It was more like a work off-site vacation. I don't like this duology, but I love the first book. The first book is one of my favorite books, or at least one of my favorite starts to a duology. I'm just really sad that this happened to be a duology because this book had potential to set up an entire franchise. At first, I was not in the mood to read A Song of Wraiths and Ruin. However, a coach road trip to the Hunter Valley and from the Hunter Valley back to Sydney put me in the right mood to read this book. And oh boy, was I thankful for having that dedicated time to listen to this story. I'm so happy that I had that dedicated time because the story happened to be absolutely epic for how much time I was spending on a coach seat. I love this book so much that it really devastates me that this book didn't have a good sequel. And the series did not have a good finale. However, this first book was so epic. And honestly, I will never forget the fondness that I have for this book based on the road trip that I had while I was listening to it on audiobook. I'm so sad that I did not like the sequel. However, the first book I will always have fond memories for because I listened to this action-packed epic story on a coach ride. I gave the first book a second chance. The first time I read it, I wasn't necessarily in the mood to read it, but I'm really happy that I gave it a second chance while listening to it on a coach. Will I be giving the sequel a second chance? No, I won't, because I was in the right mind to read the sequel. I was pumped, and I was ultimately let down. Then last year, I also gave The Cruel Prince a second chance. You know what? This wasn't a book that I gave a second chance. No, I'm sorry. This video is actually incorrectly titled for this book in particular. I gave this book a third chance. I reread this book twice. See, the thing is, I would read this book every single time a new book in the series would come out. For some reason, did not want to continue on. And the reason why I didn't want to continue on is because the prince was truly cruel. I didn't understand why the prince was cruel, but the prince is essentially cruel because of their unfortunate court circumstances. And this whole world is very cruel to Jude. It's really sad, but for some reason, I really appreciate Holly Black's commentary on what it is like to actually live in a Fae world when you are a human and you have been adopted into a Fae court. And that is exactly what this book series is about. It is commentary on what it is like to be raised by a Fae court, by telling it from Jude's perspective, but occasionally seeing Carden and what he's going through. It is one of those reads that you just actually literally need to read the trilogy till the end. Honestly, I'm really happy that I did because every time that I tried to read this book without getting the full story, I just want to give up because it was difficult to understand the why behind the what. And if anything, reading the entire trilogy and even the novella collection at the end of the series, it makes the whole experience all the more worth it because you're not going to get that from the first book, and in some ways, you're not going to get that from the second book. It's really difficult to buy into Jude and Carden's romance because you don't really get much context at all. You are literally left in the dark almost the entire time. However, what I kind of like about this trilogy is how much mystery there is to it. It is not perfect. It's not fully fleshed out. This story is completely vague a lot of the time. However, in some weird way, that kind of makes some of us in the fandom view it as a masterpiece. I'm actually really happy I gave this book a third chance and then eventually finished the trilogy, because if I didn't finish the trilogy, I would not know the full context. The second last book slash series that I've got to mention on this list today is the Mortal Instrument series. I could say that I read this too late, but I read this at 19. When I was first reading it, I instantly felt like I was too old for it, even though I was 19 years old, and now I'm 26, so like I feel like I'm even more old for it. But like the first 3 books, they are painful to read, not just because the writing's like not as good as Cassandra Clare's writing now. No, it is literally also because of the unnecessary drama that is happening in these first 3 books. Unnecessary tension. It just didn't need to be in these first few books. Oh, it just frustrated me so much, even as a 19-year-old. I feel like at that age, I should have allowed myself to read books like this, but for some reason I didn't enjoy it. The older I get, I'm actually a lot less critical of the books that I read, which is very fascinating, but hey, I'll take it. I am just enjoying things a lot more than I used to. But honestly, I was very critical of the Mortal Instrument series. However, I let go of that criticism eventually and finally lost myself in it, and I'm so happy that I finally lost myself in it because you had to eventually start at the humble beginnings in order to get to the good stuff. Honestly, if I didn't continue on with the humble beginning, I wouldn't enjoy or appreciate the Shadowhunter Chronicles as much as I do now. And the last book series that I've got to mention in this video today, I would argue, is the big inspiration behind this topic and the books that I want to give a second chance topic. Because if anything, this series made me wholeheartedly believe in second chances. And that, my friends, is Daughter Spoken Bone by Laini Taylor. I'm pretty sure I read this series for the first time 6 years ago, and last year I reread it. And oh boy, I'm so happy that I reread it because I read it at the right time. The second time, but I read it at the wrong time the first time, because the first time I was intrigued by the forbidden romance aspect of it. This book does focus on the forbidden romance, but it focuses more on the forbidden side of things rather than the romantic side of things. There's not much angst in this series. If you're wanting to read this series after like the Mortal Instruments series or any of Jennifer L. Armentrout's books, like if you are going into the series expecting something like that, you are not going to get that. It is nothing like that. This series is a lot more mature because a lot of the time it focuses on the political side of things and the war side of things, hence the forbidden nature of the romance. I am so happy I read this series at the right time, and I kind of knew what to expect because this series is one of the most important trilogies I've ever read in my entire life. I'm so appreciative of this trilogy, and honestly, I'm just so happy that I read it in the right headspace and I knew what I finally wanted when I read it. This is one of the best trilogies I've ever read in my entire life, and this is the big reason why I believe in second chances, without a doubt. So I guess that's gonna be it for this video today, book lovers. If you happen to stay till the end of the video, leave me the heart emoji with another heart behind it. Second chances, 2 hearts, it kind of goes. If you happen to enjoy this video, don't forget to give it a thumbs up and subscribe to my channel if you haven't yet already. Join the amazing community of book lovers. And also, I have social medias. Matt G Swizzle Books on Twitter and Instagram, and I'm also at Goodreads. That's www.goodreads.com/gswizzle. And finally, I'm at TikTok. Matt G Swizzle on TikTok if you want to follow me there for some bookish content. I love you, book lovers, and I will see you later. Peace.
How did I weigh half and I flipped it in a double? How did I weigh half and I flipped it in a double?